Deep in the forests of Cambodia, stone towers rise above the trees. They look impossible. Massive temples, endless walls, giant faces carved into stone, causeways guarded by serpents, moats so wide they feel less like decoration and more like oceans placed by human hands. This is Angkor. To most of the world, Angkor is remembered because of Angkor Wat, one of the most famous temples ever built. But Angkor Wat is the end of the story, not the beginning. It is what remains of a more complicated story. At its height, the Khmer Empire ruled much of mainland Southeast Asia. Its influence stretched across Cambodia and into parts of modern Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Angkor became one of the greatest urban landscapes of the pre-modern world, with temples, roads, reservoirs, villages, fields, canals, and sacred centers spread across a vast region. But the secret of Angkor was not only what rose above the ground, it was what moved across it. Before the towers, there were water, and the Khmer learned how to command it. Angkor rose in a landscape ruled by extremes. The monsoon could flood the land with more water than people needed. Then the dry season could leave fields exposed, rivers lower, and villages waiting for rain to return. The Khmer answer was not to escape that pattern. It was to engineer around it. They built canals, embankments, moats, reservoirs, and enormous artificial basins called barrays. Some of these reservoirs were so large they changed the landscape itself. From above, Angkor does not look like one compact city. It looks like a water system with a civilization built around it. The reservoirs caught water, the canals moved it, the embankments shaped it, the moats protected temples while also making them feel sacred, separated from ordinary land by water. This was the first Khmer achievement. They took a seasonal landscape and made it more predictable. A ruler who could organize water could organize life. A canal was not just engineering, it was authority made visible. It showed that the king could bring order to a world of flood and drought. Before Angkor became a city of towers, it became a city of channels. Before the Khmer could build temples for the gods, they had to build a system that made the land obey. And once they controlled water, they unlocked the next source of power: security. Water control mattered because it made food more reliable. And reliable food changes everything. In a world where one bad season could scatter a village, rice made Angkor stable. It gave people a reason to stay. It gave struggling farmers a reason to move closer to the canals, reservoirs, markets, and royal centers where survival looked more predictable. Angkor was not just pulling people with glory, it was pulling them with security. The promise was simple. Here water could be managed, here rice could grow, here a family had a better chance of making it through the dry season. That is how a landscape becomes dense. Fields spread, villages grew, markets formed. Families gathered around the system that fed them. At its height, Greater Angkor may have supported hundreds of thousands of people, with some estimates reaching between 700,000 and 900,000. That number matters because it changes the image of Angkor. It was not a lonely temple complex swallowed by jungle. It was a living region filled with farms, roads, shrines, markets, workers, priests, and families. Before rice became labor, it became security. Before it built temples, it built population. And once Angkor had people gathered around its food system, the Khmer kings could begin to organize that population into something larger, a state. A large population is not automatically power. People have to be organized in Angkor. That organization was not exactly feudal like medieval Europe. And it was not a simple caste system. It was closer to a temple-state hierarchy. Think of something closer to the Inca, but in Southeast Asian form. Power moved through the king, royal officials, priests, local elites, villages, and temple communities. The king stood at the top, surrounded by ritual, and presented as the figure who kept the kingdom fertile, protected, and connected to the divine. But the king could not personally command every field or village, so power moved through layers. Officials carried royal orders, local elites tied villages to the center. Priests gave the hierarchy sacred meaning. Temple communities controlled land, received offerings, stored wealth, and depended on workers. For ordinary people, empire was not an idea, it was obligation. A farmer might owe rice, he might owe days of labor, he might owe service to a temple, a local elite, or the king. In exchange, the system promised protection, order, access to land, and a place within the Khmer world. That organization mattered beyond Angkor itself. The Khmer Empire fought rivals, pressured neighbors, absorbed territory, and defended its place in mainland Southeast Asia. And when the Mongol Empire pushed into the region in the late 13th century, the Khmer court faced a different kind of threat. Not a local rival, a world empire. Jayavarman VIII did not defeat the Mongols in a grand heroic battle. He did something more practical. He survived them. After Mongol pressure reached Southeast Asia, the Khmer chose tribute over destruction. They bent enough to avoid being crushed while keeping the kingdom intact. That is organization too. Knowing when to command, knowing when to negotiate, knowing when survival matters more than pride. Angkor's power came from this ability to turn people, rice, temples, villages, and obligation into one working system. And once that system existed, Khmer kings could do something few rulers in history have ever done. They could turn an organized society into monuments history would remember. Angkor Wat is the building that made the Khmer Empire immortal. Built under Jayavarman II, it was originally dedicated to Vishnu, but calling it a temple almost makes it sound too small. Angkor Wat was a vision of the universe in stone. Its moat separated sacred space from ordinary land. Its causeway pulled the visitor forward. Its towers rose like Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of the universe. Its galleries showed gods, kings, battles, heavens, hells, and cosmic struggle. Local houses were built from wood, bamboo, and clay. Temples were built in stone. That mattered. The homes of ordinary people disappeared with time, but the sacred buildings remained. Stone made the empire feel eternal. A temple told people where the center of the world was. It told them who stood closest to the divine. It told them that the labor of thousands had a sacred purpose. But Angkor's temples were also records of trauma. In the late 12th century, the Chams, a powerful people from the region of modern Vietnam, attacked Angkor. They came by water. They moved through the rivers and across Tundal Sap. They struck the capital itself. For a civilization that presented Angkor as the center of cosmic order, this was more than a military defeat. It was a spiritual wound. The city of the God Kings had been violated. Then came Jayavarman VII. He defeated the Chams and restored Khmer power, but he did not simply rebuild what had been lost. He answered disaster with one of the greatest building campaigns in Khmer history. Bringing the empire to a new height, he built Angkor Thom, the great city. At its center stood the Bayon. The Bayon is one of the strangest temples in the world. Its towers are covered with giant stone faces looking in different directions. Calm, watchful, almost smiling. They do not feel like decoration. They feel like sacred presence. Wherever you move, the faces seem aware of you. Jayavarman VII also became associated with roads, rest houses, hospitals, and a royal turn toward Buddhism. Earlier rulers had often presented themselves through Hindu cosmic kingship. Jayavarman presented a different image. He was not only the center of order, he was the restorer after catastrophe. But the Khmer story was never only a story of stone. Stone is just what survived. The deeper story was still water. Water brought the rice. Water gathered the people. Water carried enemies to Angkor's gates. And as Angkor reached its greatest height, the same force that had made the empire powerful was becoming harder to control. The Khmer Empire did not fall because one thing went wrong. It fell because the system that made Angkor powerful became harder to hold together. For centuries, water had been the empire's advantage. Reservoirs stored it, canals moved it, fields depended on it, kings built their authority around it. But water systems are never finished. A canal silts up, an embankment cracks, a reservoir fills with sediment, a spillway breaks. A channel that once carried water smoothly begins sending it in the wrong direction. At a village scale, these are repairs. At Angkor scale, they are survival. When the system worked, rice was reliable, people stayed, temples rose, and kings looked powerful. When the system weakened, everything above it weakened too. After Angkor reached its height under Jayavarman VII, the system began facing new pressures. In the centuries that followed, severe droughts and violent monsoon floods appear to have strained the water network. Not just drought, not just flood, both. Long dry periods could weaken the network, lower reservoirs, damage harvests, and expose how dependent Angkor had become on stored water. Then intense monsoon rains could arrive with too much force. Canals eroded, sediment built up, water broke through channels, fields became less predictable. The same force the Khmer had mastered began escaping their control. And this mattered beyond farming. When rice became less secure, the population became harder to support. When people became harder to support, labor became harder to organize. When labor became harder to organize, canals and temples became harder to maintain. When temples became harder to maintain, royal authority became less convincing. The king's power had always been tied to order. If water flowed, rice grew, and the temples stood, the world made sense. But when the water system strained, the old promise began to crack. At the same time, Angkor faced pressure from outside. To the west, Thai kingdoms grew stronger. Sukhothai rose later. Ayutthaya became a major power. These were not just border problems. They were signs that mainland Southeast Asia was changing. Angkor was no longer the only center. Inside Khmer society, religion was changing too. Theravada Buddhism spread more deeply through the region. Unlike the older royal temple system, it did not need the king to stand at the center of the universe. Religious life could become more local, more personal, and less dependent on the god-king. That does not mean Buddhism destroyed Angkor, and climate alone did not destroy Angkor. The fall was more complicated than that, but the machine was under pressure from every direction. Water became harder to manage. Rivals became harder to contain. Belief became less centered on the king, and eventually the center moved. In the 15th century, Ayutthaya attacked Angkor. The Khmer court shifted south toward the region of Phnom Penh, closer to river trade and new political realities. That move did not mean the Khmer people disappeared. It did not mean Cambodia ended. It meant the Angkor-centered empire was over. The kingdom continued from new capitals, weaker than before, often pressured by Siam and Vietnam. Centuries later, Cambodia would become a French protectorate in the 19th century. But that was not the fall of Angkor. Angkor had already lost its role as the center holding the empire together. People still lived there. Monks still worshipped there. The stones did not vanish. But the sacred city was no longer the heart of mainland Southeast Asia. The empire moved on without it. The Khmer Empire did not vanish. Cambodia did not disappear. The Khmer people remained. Their language, culture, religion, and memory continued. That distinction matters. Empires fall. Civilizations transform. Today, Angkor Wat is one of the most recognizable monuments on Earth. It appears on Cambodia's flag. It remains a symbol of national identity, religious history, artistic achievement, and civilizational pride. But Angkor should not be remembered only as a lost city swallowed by jungle. That image is too simple. Angkor was inherited, remembered, reused, prayed in, damaged by time, war, looting, and neglect, but never made meaningless. The Khmer built temples that looked eternal. They carved gods, kings, battles, dancers, serpents, and sacred mountains into stone. For centuries, Angkor made the world feel ordered. Then the reigns changed, the rivals changed, the beliefs changed, the center moved, but the stones remained. The towers still rise above the trees. The faces of the Bayon still watch in silence. The moats still hold reflections of the sky. And Angkor Wat still stands as proof that a civilization does not have to rule forever to change the imagination of the world. The Khmer Empire built a city for the gods. But it began with something much simpler: water. And when water became uncertain, even the city of the gods could not stay the center of the world.